That fateful wedding night remains seared in my memory. I can still see Mary's face, illuminated by moonlight, as she plunged the fruit knife into my heart. The sound of her laughter echoed through our bedroom, a chilling melody that haunted my final moments. With my last breath, I whispered, "Mary, why?" Her face contorted with hatred as she spat out words that shattered my world. "George, you destroyed everything. You tore me away from Tom. His death on those cold streets? That's on your hands. You deserve this." Then darkness claimed me. But fate had other plans. I opened my eyes to find myself back in high school, years before that tragic night. The universe had given me a second chance, and I knew exactly what I needed to do: stay as far away from Mary as possible. "George," a familiar voice pulled me from my thoughts. "That new transfer student, doesn't he look just like Takashi Kaneshiro?" My blood ran cold as I turned to see Mary sitting beside me, her eyes sparkling with life, so different from the vengeful woman who had ended my life. I pinched my thigh hard, the sharp pain confirming this wasn't just another nightmare. Tears welled up in my eyes as reality sank in. I had really returned to the day Tom transferred to our class during senior year. I watched Mary prop her chin on her hand, gazing at Tom with undisguised admiration, just like she had done before. In my previous life, this moment had seemed innocent enough, until I later saw her wrapped around Tom on his motorcycle, her arms circling his waist like she'd never let go. This time, I chose a different path. Instead of dismissing her observation, I nodded and said, "He really does look like him." Her response was a disappointed pout. "You're being so perfunctory, George." I buried my nose in my textbook, pretending to read while my mind raced with memories of what was to come. Tom had been everything parents warned their daughters about: a notorious heartbreaker who had pursued every pretty girl at his previous school. While we all stressed over exams and future plans, he lived like tomorrow didn't exist, spending his nights in a blur of parties and alcohol. I still remember how he'd challenge our teachers, that cocky smirk on his face as he declared, "Who says youth can only look one way?" Looking back, I understood why Mary and so many other well-behaved girls had fallen for him. Tom represented freedom, danger, and passion, everything their carefully structured lives lacked. But this time, I wouldn't let history repeat itself. I had to find a way to protect both Mary and myself from the tragedy that awaited us all. Hey everyone, things are getting intense, right? Just when you think Mary and Tom's relationship couldn't get more toxic, there's so much more drama coming your way. Will George finally break free from their mess? And what about Mary's shocking pregnancy announcement? Is she telling the truth? Or is it just another desperate move to keep Tom? Trust me, you won't believe how this story ends. But before we continue, if you're also getting chills from this real-life story of obsession and second chances, hit that like button right now. Are you Team George for staying away, or do you think he should have tried harder to help Mary? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And here's the crazy part. The ending of this story will completely change how you look at toxic relationships. It's the kind of twist that will make you question everything you've seen so far. Don't want to miss it? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to catch the next part. Share this video with friends who love drama and mystery. They'll thank you later. Remember, sometimes the person you're trying to save might be the one you need to save yourself from. Stay tuned for what happens next. The memory of my death haunted me, Mary's bitter words echoing in my mind. "George, you tore Tom and me apart. His death is on your hands." Even in my final moments, I couldn't understand how she could blame me for Tom's tragic end. Yes, I had told her parents about their relationship, but I wasn't the one who led Tom down his destructive path. I didn't push him into street fights or force him to run with dangerous crowds. The thug who killed him, that's where her anger should have been directed. But by then, it was too late to argue. Everything had faded to black. This second chance at life came with crystal clear purpose: stay far away from Mary and her destructive path. I watched history repeat itself from a safe distance. Just as before, Tom was assigned the seat behind Mary, and while they were busy writing their tragic love story, I focused on rewriting my own future. In my previous life, I'd chosen the liberal arts track because of Mary. This time, I made a bold decision to switch to the science track. The challenge of catching up with an entirely different curriculum was daunting, but anything was better than the path that had led to my death. The day I officially transferred classes, Mary cornered me in the hallway, her eyes flashing with anger. "Why didn't you tell me you were switching classes? Something this important? How could you keep it from me?" The irony of her self-importance almost made me laugh. When I didn't respond, she demanded louder, "Why aren't you saying anything?" I met her gaze with cold indifference. "Changing classes is my personal decision. I don't need to explain myself to you." Her face crumpled in shock at my dismissive tone. "George, how could you—" she began, but I was already walking away, leaving her and our shared fate behind. This time around, I understood something crucial. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them make their own mistakes. My interference in her life had only given her someone to blame when tragedy struck. This time, I would write my own story, one that didn't end with a knife in my heart. I stood frozen in the bathroom stall, listening to Tom's bragging echo off the tile walls. "Mary's just clingy," he was saying to his friends, his voice dripping with contempt. "If she wasn't winning all those competitions, I wouldn't even bother with her." "Come on," one of his friends laughed. "Even George can't get her attention, and he's got looks and brains. What makes you so special?" Tom's response made my stomach turn. "I kissed her last night. Girls like Mary? They want someone who takes control. She does whatever I say." The conversation shifted to Mary's upcoming dance competition, and Tom boasted about how easily he could manipulate her into missing it. I waited until their footsteps faded before emerging from the stall. The past flashed through my mind, how I'd tried to warn Mary about Tom's true nature, only to have her accuse me of spreading gossip to ruin their relationship. My attempts to help had only pushed her deeper into Tom's web, until finally, I'd felt forced to tell her parents. This time around, I was determined to stay out of it entirely. But fate had other plans. One evening, I came home to find Mary sitting on my doorstep, surrounded by empty beer bottles. The sight stopped me in my tracks. This wasn't the Mary I knew, the disciplined dancer who wouldn't touch alcohol for fear of compromising her performance. This was someone else entirely, someone Tom had broken. She stumbled to her feet when she saw me, grabbing my arm with desperate fingers. "George, please," she begged, her words slurring slightly. "Tom's ignoring me. He broke up with me today, and I don't even know what I did wrong. I love him so much. I'd do anything for him. Please help me reach him." Looking at her disheveled appearance, my heart ached. The careful, ambitious girl who used to count calories and train religiously was gone, replaced by someone who'd throw everything away for a boy who saw her as nothing but a conquest. I pulled out my phone, feeling like I was setting a trap I couldn't stop. "Tom," I said into the speaker, "Mary's drunk at my doorstep. She wants to see you." Mary stood beside me, swaying slightly, her eyes fixed on the phone with painful hope. Tom's scornful laugh crackled through the speaker. "Ask her if she loves me enough to do anything for me." It wasn't a question. It was a test, a trap, and Mary walked right into it. "Yes," she cried out, her voice breaking with desperation. "I'll do anything you want." In that moment, I realized I was watching the beginning of the tragedy all over again, but this time as a helpless witness rather than an active participant. The question was, could I really stand by and do nothing? Tom's ultimatum hung in the air after he hung up. Skip the dance competition or lose him. I watched Mary's face crumble as she processed his demand, curious to see her choice without my interference. Would she choose her future or sacrifice it for a toxic love? "Is this really the only way to prove my love?" she whispered, more to herself than to me. I remained silent as she stumbled away into the darkness, her question unanswered. The news spread quickly. Mary wouldn't be competing. A convenient ankle injury sidelined her just before the competition, though I wondered if it was truly an accident. I overheard my mother discussing it with other parents. Mary had lost her shot at a direct college admission, a golden opportunity sacrificed at the altar of young love. Her mother, desperate for answers, was organizing temple visits to pray for her daughter's fortune to turn around. I couldn't help but scoff. No amount of divine intervention could save someone so determined to destroy themselves. Days later, I witnessed the fruits of Mary's sacrifice. She and Tom were walking home together, his cigarette smoke wreathing them both in a toxic haze. Mary didn't seem to mind. She was on her tiptoes, pressing kisses to his jaw like a devoted worshiper. When Tom pulled her into a shadowy alley, I watched him shotgun smoke directly into her mouth, followed by a kiss so passionate it bordered on obscene. Their public display reached its peak when Tom swept Mary into his arms and carried her into a nearby motel, neither of them caring who might see. In my previous life, I'd rushed to stop them, only to have Mary push me away with bitter words. "George, who are you to me? Why do you always have to control me?" This time, I let them go. Part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, even hoped she would sink deeper into this mess of her own making. The consequences became clear during monthly exams. Mary's grades plummeted to the bottom 10, while I soared into the top rankings. Teachers who had once seen me as merely average now looked at me with new respect. My fellow students whispered about my dramatic improvement. It was a harsh truth. The moment I stopped trying to save Mary from herself, my own life began to flourish. Standing at my desk, looking at my test scores, I realized something profound. Sometimes letting go isn't just about freeing others to make their own mistakes. It's about freeing yourself to become who you're meant to be. One quiet afternoon, while seeking help with a math problem in the teacher's office, I accidentally witnessed a desperate conversation. Mary's mother was there, her voice trembling as she pleaded with Ms. Lee. "Her grades have dropped terribly. Isn't there any way to help her improve quickly?" That's when Ms. Lee revealed the truth about Mary and Tom's relationship. The color drained from her mother's face as everything suddenly made sense. Her daughter's radical behavior changes, the plummeting grades, the missed opportunities. She stormed out of the office, stopping every student she saw, demanding to know Tom's whereabouts. When she finally found him, the hallway echoed with the sharp crack of her palm against his face. The usual chatter and laughter died instantly. Tom stood there, hand pressed to his reddening cheek, his eyes wide with shock and anger. "Who do you think you are, you crazy woman? What gives you the right to hit me?" Her voice cut through the silence like ice. "What gives me the right? You're destroying my daughter's future instead of focusing on your studies. Do you know how many years I've invested in her?" Tom's laugh was cruel and dismissive. "Get your facts straight. Your precious daughter begged to be with me. I didn't hold a knife to her throat." His words only fueled her rage, and she lunged for him, fingers reaching for his hair. That's when Mary burst onto the scene, throwing herself between them. "Mom, if you want to hit someone, hit me. I'm the one who chose to be with him." Her mother froze, staring at her daughter as if seeing a stranger. The usually obedient Mary was gone, replaced by someone who would defy her own mother for a boy like Tom. Her mother's hand trembled as she slapped Mary, her voice breaking with disappointment. "If you were with a good boy like George, I could accept it. But this worthless, are you trying to kill me?" The mention of my name sent ice through my veins. I tried to slip away quietly, but suddenly found myself the center of attention. Tom's accusing finger pointed straight at me. "George, you're the snitch?" Mary's gaze locked onto me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Though she said nothing, her eyes promised vengeance. I wanted to scream at the injustice. I'd done nothing this time around, hadn't interfered at all. Yet somehow, history was repeating itself, dragging me back into their drama despite my best efforts to stay away. Standing there, under the weight of their stares, I realized that sometimes fate has a cruel sense of humor. Even when you try to change the story, it finds ways to pull you back to the same chapter. "I have nothing to do with this," I said firmly, raising my voice just enough to be heard over the murmurs. "Andy, tell them the truth. Have I ever said anything about them to you?" But Tom refused to back down. His accusing finger still pointed at me. I felt a quiet frustration build. Despite my efforts to stay uninvolved, I was being drawn into something beyond my control. The tension shifted when Mary's homeroom teacher arrived, gently pulling her mother aside. "If your teacher hadn't told me," her mother said, her voice strained, "I never would have known what's been going on." The truth soon became clear. Some classmates had seen Mary and Tom together in a way that concerned them and had reported it to the teacher, who felt responsible for informing her mother. Though I was no longer suspected of being the one who had spoken up, the situation had already escalated. Their relationship became the center of school gossip, whispered about in hallways and classrooms. These situations often led to one of two outcomes: a quiet parting of ways or a decision to change schools. Given the attention their situation had drawn, the latter seemed more likely. Tom, a star athlete, had no interest in transferring. His academic struggles had never been his priority. He relied on his skills in sports to secure his future. His frustration was no secret. "I've dated plenty of girls, and things were always fine. But with Mary, there's always some issue. If she weren't so attached, I'd walk away right now." One night as I focused on my studies, the sound of ambulance sirens broke the stillness. I followed my parents downstairs, where I saw a sight that would stay with me for a long time. Mary's parents rushing out of their apartment, carrying her faint, unresponsive body. A trace of blood was visible on her wrist, her face unnaturally pale. As they passed, her barely audible words sent a chill through me. "George, tell Tom I'd do anything for him, even this. Please, tell him not to leave me." I stood motionless, watching the flashing ambulance lights reflect against the building. Even in that moment, her thoughts remained with him. It struck me how history seemed to be repeating itself. In another time, she had played a role in my downfall, and now she had turned that same intensity inward. This was no longer just youthful emotions. It had become something far more fragile, and the path ahead felt unsettlingly familiar. Doctors managed to treat her injury, though her hand would never fully regain its former strength. But that seemed unimportant to her. She saw it as proof of her devotion. What she might not have realized was how different things could have been. In another life, she could have been on stage, a talented dancer admired for her grace. Instead, she had chosen a road filled with hardship. At school, her classmates exchanged uneasy glances whenever they noticed the marks on her wrist. Some looked concerned, others hesitant. But Mary carried them as though they held meaning, as though they were something to be proud of. "These are symbols of my love for Tom," she would say, unaware of the worried whispers that followed. As I remained focused on preparing for exams, I heard occasional updates about Mary through conversations at home. My mother mentioned what she had heard from Mary's mother, how Tom had begun to expect more from her. Expensive gifts, things beyond her family's means, a high-end basketball, a designer jacket, even a motorcycle. Mary did whatever she could to meet his demands, pleading with her parents for money they could barely spare. "Her mother keeps coming to me, hoping I can talk some sense into her," my mom said one evening, absent-mindedly stirring her food. She's worried Mary is losing her way. A quiet warning settled in my mind. Mom, it's best to stay out of it, I said gently. Getting involved might not help. She sighed and nodded, her concern evident. It's just sad. She had such a bright future. I thought back to my past life, how I had once tried to help Mary, only for it to push her further away. This time, I had learned that some choices could only be made by the person living them, even if it meant watching from a distance as she strayed from the path she once worked so hard for. As exams approached, I immersed myself in preparation. When the final tests arrived, I completed my papers with quiet confidence, knowing my efforts had paid off. Meanwhile, Mary, unable to take her art exam due to her injury, found herself in an unfamiliar academic track, one she wasn't prepared for. Watching her struggle with questions she once might have answered with ease, the class farewell dinner was meant to be a celebration, but it quickly turned into a stage for teenage tensions. I had only agreed to attend, assuming Mary and Tom would choose to stay away. I was mistaken. Mary arrived dressed as if she were heading to a glamorous night out, rather than a simple class gathering. Her sleek black dress clung to her frame, a deliberate statement rather than an afterthought. Her golden curls cascaded over her shoulders, making her look far beyond our years. Tom walked beside her, sporting his signature leather jacket and carefully distressed jeans, his newly bleached hair mirroring hers, a coordinated display of youthful defiance. The atmosphere changed the moment our teacher left. That was when Nicole, our composed and diligent class representative, broke the tense silence with a comment just loud enough to be heard. "I'm not sure what Mary is so proud of, dressing like that." The words lingered in the air, carrying the weight of long-held frustration. It wasn't difficult to understand Nicole's resentment. Before I had transferred to the science track, she had the misfortune of sitting behind Tom during evening study sessions, forced to endure their whispered conversations and constant distractions. The giggles, the exaggerated sighs, it had all chipped away at her focus. What happened next sent a chill through me. Mary didn't protest. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she touched her cheek gently, her eyes filled not with fear, but something far more unsettling. "Tom, I'm carrying your child," she whispered. "You're the only one for me." I stood frozen, unable to process what I had just heard. 18 years old and already facing parenthood? And why did she sound as if she were delivering a line from some melodramatic play? A taxi appeared at the curb, an unspoken lifeline, and without a second thought, I stepped inside, leaving them, and their tangled reality, far behind. As the taxi pulled away, I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror. They were locked in a passionate embrace, as if the violence moments ago had been just another act in their twisted love story. Tom's slap, my presence, it was all just part of their dramatic performance. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered that the college entrance exam results would be coming out soon, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Life has a funny way of drawing lines between people's paths. While Mary and Tom couldn't even secure spots in a vocational school, my months of dedication paid off. I was accepted into a prestigious university in the capital. My heart soared, not just because I'd achieved my academic goals, but because I could finally break free from the shadow of that peculiar couple. My parents, bursting with pride, organized a celebration dinner at a local restaurant. They invited everyone, relatives, friends, and naturally, Mary's parents from next door. Mary's absence hung in the air like a heavy cloud. As the evening wore on and the wine flowed freely, my usually reserved father's face grew flushed. During a toast to Mary's parents, he let slip, "Such a shame about Mary." The words dropped like stones into a quiet pond. Mary's mother's eyes welled up, her face twisting with barely contained emotion. She attempted a smile that looked more like a grimace. Thank goodness for my quick-thinking mother, who smoothly interjected, "There are many paths to success. University isn't the only one. True talent always finds its way to shine." My father nodded enthusiastically, trying to patch over his blunder. Summer slipped away like sand through fingers, and soon our high school class scattered to the winds. During my first college semester, snippets of news about Mary and Tom trickled through our class group chat. They'd had a wedding ceremony, though without a legal marriage certificate since they were underage. Tom had taken up food delivery work, the fire in his eyes dimming under the weight of adult responsibilities. Mary became a stay-at-home mom after their baby arrived, her dreams of working forgotten. As I immersed myself in my studies, I gradually stopped checking the high school group chat. After graduation, I landed a position at a respected company. Within 5 years, I climbed the corporate ladder, becoming what others called a rising star. Women showed interest, but nothing ever clicked. The spark was always missing. My parents' gentle nudges toward arranged dates became a regular feature of our conversations, but I always found ways to change the subject. Then one day, my father's question caught me off guard. "George, you're not still hung up on that girl next door, are you?" The question made me laugh out loud. "Dad, really?" I said, amused by how far off the mark he was. The mere mention of Mary's name now turned my stomach. My father's relief was audible through the phone. But life has a way of throwing curveballs. During Spring Festival, fate played its hand. I found myself sharing an elevator with a heavily pregnant Mary. The years had changed her so much, I almost didn't recognize her. Time had painted new lines on her face, telling stories I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. The ballet goddess I once knew had vanished. In her place stood a woman worn down by life's hardships. Her once beautiful black hair had thinned drastically, revealing a parting wide enough to fit 2 fingers. Her skin told its own story of neglect, dark, rough, and lined with premature wrinkles. But what struck me most were her eyes. Those eyes that once sparkled with dreams now looked empty, like windows to an abandoned house. I knew about her parents' recent death in a car accident, and wondered if that tragedy had extinguished the last spark of life in her gaze. "George?" she said softly, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty in the confined space of the elevator. I acknowledged her with a brief nod, quickly dropping my eyes to my phone, pretending to answer New Year's messages. But Mary pressed on, her voice thin and hesitant. "Not bad," I replied casually, trying to keep my tone neutral. "And you?" She attempted a smile that never reached her eyes. "Just getting by. I've been a housewife all these years. I thought I could find work once my eldest started kindergarten, but—" She gestured to her pregnant belly, leaving the rest unsaid. The regret in her voice was as clear as a bell on a quiet morning. When the elevator stopped at the 3rd floor, relief flooded through me. Being alone with her made me uncomfortably aware of my past life's memories, specifically, the moment she took my life. Even now, years later, that scene still haunted my dreams. My palms grew damp at the thought. Just as I reached for my door, I heard Mary opening hers. Tom's voice thundered from inside, making me freeze in place. "Mary, I asked you to get some wine. What took you so long? Where is it? Why didn't you bring it back?" His words sliced through the hallway like knives, shocking me with their venom. The passionate love they once shared had clearly curdled into something ugly. Later that night, as my family gathered around the TV for the Spring Festival Gala, a violent crash echoed from next door, followed by a child's terrified screams. "Dad, stop! Mom!" The young voice pierced through the walls, making my heart clench. My mother's face crumpled with concern. "That poor girl," she sighed, shaking her head. "Tom drinks too much these days. He gets violent, not just with Mary, but with little Seth too." "Seth?" I asked, the unfamiliar name catching my attention. The crying next door continued, a chilling soundtrack to our holiday evening. Seth is Mary's oldest, my father explained quietly. Sweet kid, just turned 4. But for some reason, his father, he trailed off as another woman's cry pierced through the wall. My mother turned to him, her face etched with worry. We need to go over there, she insisted. My father started to rise, but I quickly intervened. We shouldn't get involved in their private matters, I warned, but my mother's eyes flashed with determination. I've watched that girl grow up, she declared. I can't just sit here and do nothing. Worried for their safety, I followed them to the door. Before we could knock, the door flew open. Mary stumbled out, clutching Seth to her chest. My stomach turned at the sight of her face, swollen, bruised, with blood trickling from her lip. Seth's small body shook with sobs, his face buried in his mother's neck. "Where do you think you're going?" Tom's voice boomed as he lunged forward, grabbing a fistful of Mary's hair. He yanked her backward, completely indifferent to our presence. "Stop this!" My father's voice thundered with an authority I'd rarely heard. "Only cowards hit women." Tom's eyes swept over us, his lips curling into a sneer. "She's my wife," he spat. "I'll do whatever I want with her. Stay out of it." My mother stepped forward, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "Wife or not, assault is a crime, Tom." She reached for his grip on Mary's hair, but Tom shoved her away with such force she nearly fell. "Mom!" I rushed to steady her, fury building in my chest. My father caught her other arm, his face ranked with anger. "Take Mom home," I ordered my father, seeing the situation escalating. My mother resisted. "But Mary—" "I'll handle this," I insisted, practically pushing them toward our door. Only when they were safely inside did I turn back to Tom. "What happened to you?" I asked, disgust evident in my voice. "Since when did you become someone who beats women?" He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Ask this worthless woman," he slurred, swaying slightly. The stench of alcohol rolled off him in waves. I pulled out my phone, ready to dial the police, but Mary's hand shot out to stop me. "Please don't," she begged, her voice barely a whisper. "He doesn't mean it. He's not himself when he drinks. He'll be fine once he sobers up." Her words ignited something deep inside me, a mixture of rage and frustration that threatened to boil over. "If it weren't for my parents," I hissed through clenched teeth, "I wouldn't give a damn what happens to you." The words came out harsher than I intended, but the sight of her defending her abuser made me sick to my stomach. Some part of me wondered if this was the same fierce spirit that had taken my life in another timeline, now broken and subdued by years of abuse. I left their apartment, my anger still simmering. When I got home, Mom pulled me aside, her eyes full of concern. "How are they?" she whispered. I gave her a cold smile. "They're perfect for each other. One loves to hit, the other loves to take it. Go to bed, Mom. It's late." She hesitated, but finally retreated to her room. The middle of the night brought an unexpected visitor. Mary stood at our doorway, clutching Seth, tears streaming silently down her face. It was Seth who finally broke the silence, his small voice trembling. "Dad got drunk again. He hit us both." The words hung heavy in the air. Looking at Mary now, everything clicked into place. Her transformation wasn't just grief from losing her parents. She was living in a prison of constant fear. The vibrant girl who once danced across stages was gone, replaced by a woman who seemed to be crumbling from within. Not yet 30, but already carrying the weight of a much longer life of suffering. Suddenly, violent pounding shook our door. "Mary!" Tom's voice boomed through the wood. "I know you're in there!" Each bang made Mary flinch as if she'd been struck. She grabbed my mother's arm, her knuckles white with fear. Annie, please, she begged. Don't open it. He's drunk. He's not himself. Mom tried to comfort her, but I couldn't help but feel a surge of bitter resentment. Why were they always dragging us into their drama? Earlier, when I tried to help by calling the police, Mary refused. Now, after another beating, she runs to us for shelter. It felt like some cruel joke. In this life or my previous one, our family seemed destined to be props in their toxic romance. Without a word, I walked to my room and closed the door. Then I did what I should have done earlier. Mary rushed to his defense, though her demeanor told a different story. "He's right, officers. It was just a misunderstanding," she insisted. But the officers only exchanged glances, their skepticism clear. Without another word, they led Tom away, leaving behind a silence that felt almost sacred. Mary gathered up Seth and hurried after them, disappearing into the night. The next morning, I announced to my parents that I had planned a road trip. Their faces lit up. After years of hard work, they had rarely traveled beyond our province. Within hours, we were packed and on the road to Sanya, where the sea stretched endlessly under a clear winter sky. It was the perfect getaway for them, and for me, a much-needed escape from the troubles next door. As the city faded behind us, I couldn't help but reflect on how some people find themselves in difficult situations and struggle to break free. The warm air of Sanya felt like a promise of new beginnings, freedom from the past, from the drama I had no intention of being pulled into. Originally, we had planned this trip for next month, but it had turned into a sudden departure, not just from the cold, but from the turmoil Mary seemed to carry wherever she went. Yet fate has a way of finding you. Even George? Earth to George! Dad's gentle elbow brought me back to reality. I forced a smile, pushing away the dark thoughts. "Oh, just planning our holiday activities," I said, watching relief spread across their faces. Sitting there, surrounded by the warmth of family and the smell of fresh dumplings, I felt truly grateful. In this new life, I was finally free from Mary's madness. I could live normally, be a good son, and create happy memories with my parents. The weight of the past still lingered, but it no longer had the power to control my future.